extremely and long overdue Stukov guide has been popularly requested. I feel now's as good a time as any. Stukov, basically at the peak of his meta-ness, if that's a word. He's a very difficult hero to play because there's a lot of minor nuances. The difference between you using your trait early versus not using your trait can be the difference between a win and a loss in a team fight, which can ultimately be the difference between a win and a loss in a game. And so that's why I hesitate for heroes like this that are much more difficult. But we all know your bio kill switch, if you have the healing pathogen on you, you get bonus healing. If you have the weighted pustule on the enemy person, you have damage and a massive slow, and then at 13 a root that everybody really goes into. But we're going to talk about some of the usage of this healing pathogen. It can also be a little complex, right? Sometimes you want to alt Q yourself so that it just goes on you and then you can spread it. Sometimes you want to Q to somebody else, but not everybody knows that that Q takes a second before it spreads to somebody else. So you always have to be very careful on who you put your Q on first. If you have a Tracer on your team and you put Q on Tracer and they Q in instantly, nobody else gets that healing, which can make it a little difficult. So you always have to figure out who you're going to heal first. Sometimes it might just be that one person that you press Q and press D just to keep that one person alive, which is really sad because your bio kill switch is 16 seconds, which is your burst heal. So let's talk about some of the ways that you can supplement your healing and get more play through some of the talents. Weighted pustule. Post 13, you're ideally wanting to set this up with virulent reaction. You can use this on people around you. You can set up kill targets, things that you can't do. 70% slow is pretty OP. And then your lurking arm can zone out different people. You can put it on gates. You can interrupt mosh pit. You can do all kinds of things with it. So we'll talk about this now. Level 1. Now keep in mind that all of these have a really good place in the meta in the right situation. The most common is Reactive, Ballistic Spores, or Spine Launcher. Low blow is really if you're playing in a coordinated team to where you know that you're getting single target blow up and you want to make sure to finish off that target. And even then, it's a bit of a reach. That's a very hyper-specific, I'm in a team with calm situation. Fetid Touch can be okay, but I think this is the one a lot of people stay away from as a Stukov. Of course, getting the cooldown reduction on this is nice, but you can have just as much success. Now, Reactive Ballistic Spores is also one of the hardest because you have to have foresight. This is really easy because it's free, but it's also one of the hardest to use because if you're using this correctly, you have the foresight to know when you're going to take damage and when you can use things. When taking damage below 50% health, instantly spread a weighted pustule to all nearby enemy heroes and reset the cooldown of bio kill switch. It's got an internal cooldown of 15 seconds. So what you can do is you can get a weight or a healing pathogen out, activate your bio kill switch, and then the minute you take, or that very second you take that 50% or less damage that triggers this, you now turn right around and you can do basically the exact same thing again, which is insane healing. But that requires a lot of foresight, which is what makes it one of the more difficult ones to use. It's like, well, what if I don't trigger this at 50%? Well, now you're left without a level 1 talent and you don't have your trait, which can be really, really tough in the middle of a fight. So when to pick Reactive Ballistic Spores over Spine Launchers? Spine Launcher, I love Spine Launcher against the likes of ETC, against the likes of Garrosh. Things that I want to keep away from my team or keep under control. My auto attacks, yeah, they become a lot weaker. But if I can slow somebody by 20% for 1.5 seconds and your auto attack is really slow, I can now just kind of kite those individuals. Garrosh coming in, not going to stop him if he uses Indomitable, but I can keep people from engaging when they want to. Pretty good versus a Mal'Ganis. I don't always want to be in melee range versus these heroes. Now, you can also play a different way, right? I can play against those characters, and I'm not obligated to go Spine Launcher, but it is convenient that you now have a ranged auto attack that you can also control the front line with. That helps out a lot. But let's say I'm going against maybe somebody that doesn't require as much decision making around that. And all of a sudden it's like, well, they've got a Johanna, they've got a Kerrigan, they've got an Alarak. Now all of a sudden I have this foresight ability of I can see somebody engaging, I can preemptively use my healing pathogen, and things look pretty good. And then I can use that instant heal. I can see there's a lot of tricks involved, and hopefully you can kind of think about this talent, because it's way too hard to go into all the minor nuances, because there's going to be so many variables, and it really comes with experience playing Stukov. We should probably switch the overlay, by the way. So reactive ballista spores, because it also creates a giant area around you, you now have that big AoE slow around you. You can conveniently also use this the same way that you would see an Anduin use a light bomb, right? I'm not saying go in and start inting, but you could easily put a healing pathogen on, run into some melee, make sure that you take that, or run into an area, take that damage that puts you just below 50%, and then press D, and now everybody that's around you is slowed by 70%. You do some damage, and your team now has an instant turn in a team fight. I'm not saying that's how it should always be used, but you have to think about the different ways that you can use reactive ballista spores, whether offensively or defensively, proactively or reactionary. And that's what makes it so hard, is because there are so many cases where you're going to have it happen. You're like, that would have worked had I seen that. And it's much more difficult to use. And then you have to learn through those failures. Spine Launcher, probably the safest by far. I used to love Fetid Touch back in the day. I don't think this is that great. The amount of times you're trying to go out there and reach. Now, if you don't have anybody to control, and you are fishing for those level 13 virulent reactions, Fetid Touch now becomes more valuable. Maybe it's a team that's less threatening, and your team is much more offensive. I like to spread my healing pustule around, but I also like to make sure that I can get those. This is basically when you get your Fetid Touch, when you get your weighted pustule on Stukov, and you get your combo, and whether it's getting the weighted pustule and then pressing D, or putting the lurking arm down as well below it, that's all great. If you're needing to do this quite frequently, then something's really wrong. You're talking about 10 seconds on a weighted pustule, 10 seconds on lurking arm. Because most of the time, these work together to where, like, even if I don't have virulent reaction, I'm getting a combo onto somebody. Getting cooldown reduction on my weighted pustule just means I'm fishing at this point. Because normally I don't want to use my weighted pustule without my lurking arm combo. It just means that it allows me to fish a little bit more. And because this doesn't do a lot of damage without getting the extra slow and all that other stuff, it doesn't do a whole lot. And therefore, that's why you don't see it as often. So reactive ballista spores can be really good in the right situation. Spine Launcher, very safe pick. Fetid Touch means you're going fishing. And Low Blow is, if you're in a coordinated team, then you don't need to be watching this video to understand why that's good. Level 4, 2 absolutely insane talents here that you should absolutely be keeping an eye on. So there's burst damage, and then there's poke damage, and then there's everything else in between. One really phenomenal thing is Biotic Armor. This thing is so broken in the right situation. If I'm playing against a gray main and another auto attacker, Biotic Armor all day. You cannot stop me from picking this. 15 physical armor, and it pairs very well with Universal Carrier later, because it means that it's just going to constantly go through, and I constantly have 15 physical armor against heavy auto attack teams. Not only that, but whenever I detonate Bio Kill Switch, it increases it to 75 armor, which means that normally in those situations, I'm using Bio Kill Switch to deal with burst damage or deal with people that are trying to kill me in that physical fashion, right? Greymanes come to mind, Rainers come to mind, Cassia right now, Sergeant Hammer just had some changes, so keep an eye out there. This gives you 15 physical armor, and then when you activate it, you get 75 physical armor for 2.5 seconds, which is a large amount. Now, one good spread. If you've ever seen a Stukov have like 20, 30,000 more healing than everybody else, it's because they went one good spread. Biotic Armor doesn't give you the same healing throughput as it would for everybody else, but it gives you armor. Armor is not a stat that can be weighted. But one good spread gives you more healing throughput. After Healing Pathogen infests 3 targets, you restore 10 mana and reduce the cooldown of Healing Pathogen by 2 seconds. Which means that even if you don't go Universal Carrier later, you have different uses for this, because you can now just continually pass that healing around. It's not a lot of healing, but you're talking about heals that target for 222 health over 4.5 seconds. Think of a Deckard healing potion, if you will, slightly more. And it's going to constantly spread. The more you can spread it, the more healing throughput you're going to have. So being able to have this and have the cooldown reduction on it, because your Healing Pathogen spreads for 4.5 seconds, Your healing, this brings the cooldown now down to 8 seconds. So you only have 3.5 seconds downtime on passing heal around, which can be really good for your team overall. And if you went reactive Ballistic Spores, there's a whole lot of things you can do with that. Vigorous reuptake is very situational more than the other ones, I think. There's times where you need to pick this. Bio Kill Switch heals for 30% more when detonating 3 or more healing pathogens. This means that you're trying to burst heal your whole team. This can actually work pretty well against those very same comps, like a Lunara comp. It's like, I can just spread this around all the time, or I can get really big heals periodically. One good spread tends to win out in that department for a number of reasons, and a lot of these are weighted. To be fair, Stukov has a really healthy talent tree to be able to deal with different situations, but one good spread is kind of the backup. Vigorous reuptake, a lot more narrow focus, but there is a focus where this is good. All of these are good talents, but Biotic Armor, if there's 2 auto attackers on the other team, 100% pick rate. If they have maybe burst damage, maybe a Jaina, maybe I do this, but this does require you to spread it to 3 people. Normally you're using Bio Kill Switch on 1 to 2, maybe 3 people if you're walking away, not in the middle of a fight, which can make things really scary unless you plan on going into Universal Carrier. Level 7. All of these also have different potential. If I'm going against a solo tank on triple ranged, I might go the long pitch. Increase the range of weighted pustule, which means I have better playmaking potential. Detonating 2 or more weighted pustules causes my bio kill switch and basic abilities to recharge 100% faster. This can be good for that very reason, but at the same time, this is the big one right here. Detonating exactly 1 weighted pustule, but any number of healing pathogens, with Bio Kill Switch reduces the cooldown of Bio Kill Switch to 5 seconds and other basic abilities by 1.5 seconds. You have short cooldowns on these. They're all 10 seconds. So now you have 8.5 seconds, and if you went into other stuff. But the big one is your Bio Kill Switch. This is your bread and butter. If you use this, now if you're on the enemy team, right? I'm communicating if I can. Stukov used his big heal. Now we can fight them. Or we forced out a big heal. 16 seconds is a long time not to have a big heal. For Stukov, when you have targeted excision, detonating 1 weighted pustule, which to be fair is going to be a lot of the times, you can now get this and instantly get that. And now it reduces the cooldown of Bio Kill Switch to 5 seconds, not by 5 seconds, but it reduces basic abilities by 1.5 seconds, which means that now I have a lot more burst healing every 5 seconds. This does require you to land your W, which, you know, if you went Fetid Touch, then that makes it a little bit easier to have more opportunities. But targeted excision, if I'm going against that very same front line, this gives me more healing throughput because I'm getting more heals. And if I went 1 good spread, we're talking about 8.5 seconds of cooldown. And then here, this reduces it by 2 seconds, which means that that's 6.5 seconds. And if weighted pustule's up 4.5 seconds, that's 2 seconds of downtime. So there's a lot of math that goes into the healing throughput process, and targeted excision kind of narrows that gap even further, meaning more healing, more burst healing potentially, which helps out a lot. Long pitch can be good if you know that you're going to be at a safe distance. It also has an impact on your Bio Kill Switch and basic abilities. Drawing Infestation actually does have a lot of really good situational value. It's kind of hard to go into each one of these. Look, you can keep it down for a long time, but getting this to where it's only channeled for 4 seconds. This is more zoning control, more silencing control. It's really hard for people to walk through a giant area that's silenced because they can't do anything but walk through, which gives your team more time to potentially do something else. I don't want to go into too much here. I think this is definitely a good talent. It's just kind of hard to go into the situations on when you want to. There's going to be certain maps, like if I'm on Hanamura, this makes no sense. If I'm on Cursed Hollow, those things are narrowed anyways. But the thing about this is that this allows me to put this down and hope to get a big area there. Level 10. Now, this is a really difficult one because technically I really like one choice. And I think that another choice technically has potential value. Flailing Swipe versus Massive Shove. Massive Shove is a skill shot. Flailing Swipe is kind of a skill shot that's almost impossible to miss. If I'm going against a full dive team, a lot of dive, and I don't have that same type of counter engage, Flailing Swipe all day. If I'm going against somebody where one person is diving, Flailing Swipe, instead of worrying about shoving somebody away and out, that's diving my team. What if I swipe the other 4 people further away while my team kills this one person, right? Think backwards sometimes with some of your talents. Massive shove, and then think about the big one, right? If I'm going against an ETC, I'm probably going Spine Launcher just so I can make sure that I'm here. That's not a guarantee, but I am making sure that I'm in position to where I need to have an interrupt. I have a silence, and I have a big flailing swipe or a massive shove. While massive shove is on a 20-second cooldown, I'm using my heroic with the explicit purpose of doing one thing most of the time, and that's maybe interrupting Mosh Pit. It doesn't matter whether it's 60 seconds or 20 seconds or 5 seconds or 100 seconds. My job is to match up with that. One of these I can miss. The other one I can't. Flailing Swipe, you basically can't miss. Yes, it's a little bit different, but I think Flailing Swipe wins by a wide margin on a lot of those areas. Now, there are times where Massive Shove can be good, and a lot of the times I see people pick Massive Shove when it appears to be good, but it's actually not good, and Flailing Swipe could do the exact same thing, just a lot easier and much more guaranteed. I think these situations where you're picking Massive Shove now, I would highly encourage you to pick Flailing Swipe. Think backwards about a talent instead of isolating one with a Massive Shove. Isolate them by way of just knocking back the other 4 and then killing that one person. Instead of pushing one person away, push 4 people away while one person gets blasted by your entire team. There's a lot of different things you can do in that situation. I like Flailing Swipe a lot as a result. If you are Stukov, you need to concentrate on playing Virulent Reaction. This is basically a heroic ability. It is insanely strong. It has been, it always will be, and it will continue to be long after this video until they nerf it to some degree. Detonating a weighted pustule on an enemy who is inside of Lurking Arm roots them for 2 seconds. This thing is insane. So this is where the tricky part about playing Stukov comes in. Let me get some coffee. The problem that most people have, myself included, is that getting Virulent Reaction means that I need to throw a weighted pustule out, and I need to use my trait. 16-second cooldown and a 10-second cooldown. Now this is where we can go back and look at targeted excision, because normally I'm rooting one person, and rooting one person for 2 seconds is really good. So this is kind of the forgiveness factor for my 13. I'm not normally going to weighted pustule, Lurking Arm, and then trait if I don't have almost a guarantee. Now if I hit 2 people, it kind of takes away from this. But if I can single out one person and try and WED, now I don't have to worry about spreading the other button that I have, my healing pathogen, which is the biggest one. That's where a lot of the trap comes in, is you get your healing pustule out, or your healing pathogen out, and it starts to expire. Somebody's at like 50% health on your team, and you miss your combo. Now, you don't have a lot of your buttons, and things can be really awkward. Targeted Excision at least says that you get a 1.5 second cooldown on getting that back. If you did go one good spread, then this helps if it hits 3 people. And then this also gives you your bio kill switch back 5 seconds later. However, if you miss that combo, you are now able to be punished. You didn't get the root, you didn't get the silence, you don't have your buttons for several seconds now, and I can turn on them, which is why targeted excision can be really good. But Virulent Reaction allows you to make some of the biggest plays in the game. Stukov is one of the rare healers that can actually be the aggressor. You don't always need to be the aggressor, you don't always need to be the setup person. But if I can combo somebody, everybody else has a really easy follow-up. This is 2 seconds. They can't use their medallion. We'll see if that stays in the game. They have to be cleansed through external purposes. So that's why Virulent Reaction can be so good, and when you pair it with some of the other talents, now becomes more forgiving as a result. Lingering Spines I have seen used, especially with Growing Infestation. I'm not a big fan of a lot of these. I know a lot of people like them. Poppin' Pustules, if you've ever seen me, I love playing Melee Assassin Stukov as a second healer. It's a meme. I don't recommend everybody trying it, but this can be really good. But I don't want to open your mind to the other abilities because you're missing out on a lot of playmaking potential by not going Virulent Reaction. if I have 4 people with CC on my team, I might not need this and I might look towards some of these other ones. But at the same time, I'm not a huge fan of advocating for something that you're going to pick probably 2% of the time, divided up by 3 other talents. Virulent Reaction is that good that you need to be comfortable with using it. You need to make sure that you're using it, because if you didn't go Targeted Excision, now if you missed that combo, you don't have cooldowns and you will die, and that's where things go bad. Level 16, all of these are good. All of these are good in a big way. Super Strain can be really good. Whenever an ally with Healing Pathogen is stunned or rooted, they are instantly healed for 250, which is basically, you know, it's self-explanatory. Universal Carrier, I like this. This is much more forgiving. It makes you, if you're learning the character, but it's also just good in general, it makes you have to think less. Super Strain, if I know I'm dealing with a lot of stuns and roots, yeah, think I'm playing against like a Johanna Deckard. There's a lot that goes on there. She stuns with Condemn, which is a mini stun. I want to throw that out there because I know they're being comboed, or they're getting rooted immediately after by Deckard. I can throw this on there. They get burst healing. It's basically burst healing on a specific target. Because it's only 250 healing, it's not super great, but when you have the idea that you have potentially 2 to 3 of these out, you're looking at potentially 750 instant healing, and this is level 0 value, so this of course scales. So it could be good healing in the right situation versus the right comps. Johanna comes to mind because Condemn is a mini stun, so just getting hit by that means instant heals. But at the same time, Universal Carrier, this is the one where if I went Universal Carrier, do I really need one good spread? If I went Universal Carrier, let's hope that I went Biotic Armor, because now that's permanent 15 physical armor. 15 physical armor permanently is never bad. That just goes back and forth. Not only that, but whenever I'm ready to pop my bio kill switch, everybody has 75 armor and I don't have to worry about spreading, waiting for it to pass, and then pressing it. So Biotic Armor plus Universal Carrier can be really good. Universal Carrier plus one good spread, kind of double dipping, but it at least allows you to have that forgiveness factor of saying, you know what, Universal Carrier says this is constantly healing. I didn't go some of these other talents. So when I use Virulent Reaction, everybody gets a heal, a burst heal, no matter what happens, because everybody's there, assuming everybody's within the same general area, you're at least hitting 4 people, 3 to 4 people minimum with your burst heal. And Virulent Reaction says, you know what, we got this plus Targeted Excision and all this, so we get cooldowns back, we get healing back, we popped it, things are good. At the same time, Pox Populi Bio Kill Switch no longer removes Healing Pathogen, but instead sets its duration to 3 seconds. So this is kind of a reverse way of going about things. All of these can be good in the right situation. So that's why I said you kind of got to keep an open mind when you're building your character, when you're picking your talents. You have to understand what the enemy composition is, what your team comp requires, and what to expect from their abilities. And sometimes their abilities might not come by way until you get other talents, but at the same time, if I'm going against a heavy auto attack team, I don't have to think. I know Biotic Armor plus Targeted Excision and Virulent Reaction and Universal Carrier is what I'm going. That's the way it is. Like, I have no other reason to go any other talents. But there are times where you have to kind of adjust on the fly, and all these can be good. Super Strain can be really good for dive comp with lots of CC, because I don't get the same type of big healing out because I didn't go Vigorous Reuptake. I'm waiting because I know I've been dealing with this all game. I now have that burst healing here for free before I press any of my other buttons. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of handle this. Pox Populi, because it no longer removes the Healing Pathogen, means that you have other playmaking potential abilities as well. So all of these can be good. It's just a matter of adjusting to the enemy team and adjusting to your own team. Level 20, Bio Explosion Switch has been the go-to for a long time. But Controlled Chaos also has an area. This says that you no longer swap, 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 or swap, 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 as is the timing. You now get individual swings, and this makes it a lot easier. Think Bright Wings Emerald Wind, to where instead of like one big pulsating, you get control of each different pulse. This can be good in different situations post 20. Top off, if I went Spine Launcher into maybe one good spread, or excuse me, into Biotic Armor, into Universal Carrier, this reduces the healing. This can give some of that healing back. and it heals for more while they're above 60%. This is not good versus burst teams. This is not good in that situation. This is more good for poke-oriented teams. But post-level 20 fights tend to have a little bit of poke with a lot of burst from everybody. But this can be the difference between like having an extra 10 to 20% health going into that burst phase if you're the initiator. But Bio Explosion, Bio Kill Switch now also detonates Lurking Arm, dealing 230 damage, applying a weighted pustule, and silencing enemy heroes inside for 2.5 seconds. So this is the way without having to worry too much about the weighted pustule and getting that value out there. So Bio Kill Switch detonates that Lurking Arm that you're putting out there with your E, dealing some damage, and then the big silence. This is like having another heroic here if you can catch them in that. But a 2.5 second silence as well as that can be pretty insane. And so Bio Explosion Switch has been the #1 for a long time. But all of these other ones never go. If you went Massive Shove, please don't go Push Comes to Shove. It's not worth it. Most of the time, Massive Shove's not worth it either. But that's Stukov. Stukov has 2 really strong traits when it comes to that. The healing throughput on one build, the armor on another. You can't weigh armor reduction or armor that reduces damage. It's impossible. Kind of like Uther healing. You're not going to see the damage that was reduced. You're only going to see the healing that came through. The more healing, the better, of course, but when you're going against very specific teams, Stukov with that physical armor is what's really good overall. But in general, you have to be able to read the enemy team. If they have one auto attacker and another ranged, and maybe they're offlaners like a Leoric, although Leoric now did get the auto attack buff, and we've seen more auto attack damage, you might go into something different, right? You might go into Biotic Armor. 15 armor, pathing through, universal carrier is pretty good. You have to consider what you pick at level 1, whether it's reactive or spine launcher most of the time, into biotic or one good spread, depending on the enemy team. You have to be able to read the enemy team's drafts and understand their strengths versus your weaknesses and how you can counter that. Targeted excision is really good for a lot of reasons that we already went through. Into virulent reaction, which means that you're now a playmaker. This is insanely powerful. Your 16s, which again, you're reading the enemy draft. And then into 20, potentially Bio Explosion if you're playing more on the back foot and the defensive end and you're just getting poked. Top off might be better. Or Controlled Chaos if you're trying to actually control chaos of potentially a dive heavy team. 1 swipe is good enough to get them far enough back if they're right on top of you. 3 swipes buys you time, which is the main one. But if it's a team that's going to be coming at you wave after wave, Controlled Chaos. Buy your team space, step back. Buy your team space, step back. And so you have the additional charges, making it easier to control the enemy team. So Stukov, for that reason, fits into a lot of really good categories. He just fits into the hard to play until you start to master it. Right now, Stukov is very popular at higher ranks because of what he brings in certain areas. It's not necessarily you have to pick him and you always have to pick him in certain drafts, but in certain situations, Stukov can be super strong just by having 15 physical armor. It's really OP into 75, of course. It makes those fights bigger and better for your team. So there's a lot of pros, a lot of cons if you don't play it well. If you mess up combos, where's the forgiveness? If you miss your W, you have to wait 10 seconds before you can use it again. And that's where the temptation to go Fetid Touch at 1 starts to come in. It means you're fishing as opposed to just relying on skill, which is not terrible, but is Reactive, Ballistic, Spores, or Spine Launcher going to be better? This one being one of the more difficult talents to understand in terms of how each situation can vary, how to use this. So I encourage you to go out, try out Reactive, Ballistic, Spores, understand when and where you need this. This one requires a lot of foresight, not just in the draft, but in terms of how the fights are going to play out and how you can handle those things versus, am I playing against the Garrosh? If I'm playing against the Garrosh, I want you to stay away 20% slower all the time. So I'm just going to auto attack you and auto attack you and auto attack you. Yes, as a healer, you should be auto attacking. And don't forget the one big trait that Stukov has, slow auto attack speed, and without spine launcher means that you hit like an absolute truck. So one thing you can do is use Reactive Ballistic Spores, welcome in the bad boys, get that damage down, get that healing pathogen out, press D, slow them by 70%, and give them the big old pimp hand. That's Stukov, baby. So get out there, get to smacking people, see how it works for you. But overall, Stukov is a very good character in the game. I think he's very well balanced. His tree is really good, gives you a lot of flexibility in key areas, and allows you to play around what it does. It's just all around your trait similar to Lucio. It's just you have a lot more tied into your other abilities, as opposed to Stukov, who has slows, who has damage, who has roots, who has all that stuff. As opposed to Lucio, who's just like, look, I just amp it up every now and again, and I occasionally boot people. So one, more difficult, far more rewarding. The other one, Lucio. Okay? That's Stukov in a nutshell. He's pretty much good on almost any map. More chokes equals better lurking arm positioning, which means better root capabilities. Wide open maps, not terrible for those longer fights with the physical armor. But just keep in mind that Stukov does have some weaknesses in some of those areas. But just keep an eye out, look for it. I wish I could get into all the details of all the drafts. But there's just so many nuances, whether it's your team, whether it's their team, whether it's a combination of both. You're going to have to figure those out, and it really comes from experience. And so good luck out there.